So we've talked about spreadsheets and the challenges that the spreadsheets can often create. We've talked about how technology should be leveraged to improve the processes in the business, but always sympathetic to the cultures that we have. And what I'm now going to talk about is one version of the truth. And what we've already touched on is the fact that often when data is transposed, rekeyed, whatever that might be, maybe in a spreadsheet, that you're not getting that one version of the truth. And it is common, but when we talk about one version of the truth, what we're suggesting is that if data is entered in a consistent way, that data then gets submitted through to somebody for approval, and once it's fully approved, becomes a transaction in the payroll, the HR, or more likely the finance system once that process has taken place. So the data's only been entered once, it's passed through a business process, captured the data, etc. So what we're going to talk about now is staff expenses. And when we talk about things like staff expenses, we should always be talking about the process. So we talk about procure to pay, we talk about expense entry through to reimbursement of expenses back to the individual that's incurred that particular scenario. So if we just drill into expenses in a little bit more detail, like we said already, there's out-of-pocket expenses. So I've incurred a train travel on behalf of the company that I spent my own money on, and therefore I want that £40 back. Therefore I submit that data. That then gets approved, hopefully, before it gets to finance. And then finance might be there going, okay, well, Steve belongs to this department, train travel is this cost centre, and he belongs to the London office. So where do I code that expense? So quite convoluted, but quite a consistent process that happens. The other type of expenses we often have, less so than perhaps a few years back, but credit card expenses, whereby senior people in a business or a wider part of the business have company credit cards. So they're not out of pocket, but they are able to expense hotels and subsistence and train travel on those credit cards. And then, of course, at the end of the month, the credit card statement arrives, and then those statements get pushed out to individuals to confirm they've got the receipts, confirm they're happy with it, and potentially say what project it related to if those expenses were project based. And then the third one, again, less common, more maybe in non-for-profit organisations where they're undertaking work on large projects, sometimes overseas projects, cash advances. So completely opposite to out-of-pocket expenses, whereby they're given $100 in advance, then they travel to a location to carry out some work, and they're spending that $100 cash because those particular countries prefer cash than debit cards and other type of things. So it's almost like a float, a bit like a petty cash tin in effect, but given to an individual. So how do we make those processes more straightforward? Well, the reality is why wouldn't somebody photograph the receipt that they've incurred? Say the expense type was train travel and it was £40 and it was yesterday. And then the expense type, train travel, knows it's non-vatable, because why would we want to burden that individual with needing to worry about vatability if we can understand it at the point that the data is entered? That gets submitted. Electronically, it gets approved by the line manager. Maybe it needs more than one level of approval because the claim was over £1,000, so or an individual line item was more than £200. So it can go through tiered approval to make sure that the right data is approved and captured. And actually, when it then hits finance, because it's me, because the system knows the cost centre for train travel, what department I belong to, and what office I belong to, it's already coded. So therefore, once that's dropped into the purchase ledger, we can then remit to our staff. So rather than remit to all of our other suppliers, we can remit to our staff 2, 3, 4 times a month if we choose to do so. But that's what I call one version of the truth, and a joined up process that is scalable. So whether you have 40 staff or 500 staff, the process remains the same. So we're going to move on, we're going to look at some other processes, and we're going to talk about things like procure to pay in the next episode.